this and see if that. So there's still sound there. Let's transition. So there's still sound. Okay. I don't know what in the world is going on here, but it seems to be working now. So I am going to get out of there and we'll go to chat and we're still working. So that's perfect. Okay. All right. So I don't know what the world's going on here. So I don't know. If I transition to that, I still have sound. Okay. So I don't know. I'm going to figure this out. I swear to you. But anyway, we're going to get started. The purpose of this whole deal was I wanted to get into the healthcare system in the United States. And I wanted to kind of just walk through what's wrong with our healthcare system. And I'm going to trim this up when I get it onto the channel so we can get all this nonsense out of here. But I wanted to talk about the healthcare system and kind of what in the world is going on and why we are having this constant struggle over healthcare in the United States. So the first thing we have to understand is how we got here. We have to understand how we got here as a nation, how we got into this broken healthcare system that we have. And the answer to that is actually pretty simple. And it is the fact that let's see here. Oh my goodness gracious. So at the end of World War II, we had a wage freeze, and let's see here. Here's how the health insurance. All right. So when we talk about how we got here, we look at the system that we're in right now came into play at the end of World War II. So you're coming out of depression. I'll just read an excerpt from this article. You're coming out of the depression, and all of a sudden you have all this hiring going on. Things are going great, economically speaking. Things are growing. So there's all these men abroad, hiring's happening, and there's a ton of competition for labor. And so that October, President Roosevelt did a chat where he talked about that we needed to make sacrifices at home as well as abroad. And so here it says, quote, is we shall be compelled to stop workers from moving from one war job to another as a matter of personal preference and to stop employers from stealing labor from each other. So essentially what Roosevelt thought was that all this competition and this upward pressure on wages was going to cause major issues and major inflation. And so as a result, they essentially did a hiring or a wage freeze. They put a wage cap, and the problem with that was they exempted healthcare. So they allowed the employers to compete with each other on the basis of healthcare, but not regarding wages. So of course there was this huge push on the employer side to add healthcare. And then the IRS decided employer contributions to health insurance premiums were going to be tax-free. And this happened a few years later. It didn't kind of happen simultaneously, but they tax exempted employer contributions to health insurance premiums, which meant workers didn't have to pay as much out of pocket. So, and then of course this happened at the same time as the arrival of penicillin. And so here you say before 1930, you probably didn't want to be treated. One of the arguments against a free market system or that we don't need this health insurance is that when Americans paid for health insurance out of their pockets, we had such a primitive health insurance system that nobody was really getting care. There wasn't CAT scans and all this expensive treatment and all these different things. So it wasn't really all that important that people had health insurance. Health care was so primitive and so cheap that health insurance wasn't really a necessity. So just as healthcare started to get more complex and more complicated, all of a sudden we also had, at the same time, we had health insurance kind of step in. And that's what broke the system. Because I don't think anyone's going to make the argument that we have a free market, but we need to understand that our system that we have today wasn't born from the free market either. Like we didn't get here because free market economics prevailed and we ended up with this system. This wasn't the best that the free market could come up with by any stretch of the imagination. So when you look at it from that perspective, you understand that the system was broken by government a long time ago. And in Europe, and you look at their universal healthcare systems, those systems were really built out of necessity at the end of the wars. So they were completely economically devastated. There's all this injury, all this death. throughout Europe. And so the government's kind of just had to step in and take care of them. But the system that we have in place right now, that government created, that put health insurers in between the end user of healthcare and the provider of healthcare, essentially eliminates one of the most important parts of a properly functioning economic system, and that is pricing. I just read chapter 6 of Sowell's Basic Economics for like the fourth time, and he really explains the misconceptions of profits in our economy. And you hear all the time in the media that we can't have a for-profit health system. I mean, you can't be for-profit health system. It's a bad thing. And that's really a misconception of what profit means in an economic system. So if you think about profit as overcharge or greed, then yeah, you're not going to want people being overcharged for healthcare services. You're not going to want greed to be a driver of the economy, particularly in the healthcare sector. So you're going to look at this and you're going to say, yeah, I don't want greed. I don't want these things. And if you look at profit as that, then you're not going to want a for-profit healthcare system. But if you read Thomas Sowell, he'll explain to you what profit really is, well, there's two ways to become profitable. So in the United States, we tie profitability to greed and to overcharge. And if you tie into the Marxist theory, it's theft of, labor and all this different stuff. If you buy into Austrian economics, essentially, or free market principles, you buy into the idea that profit is the reward for being for efficiency. Because there's really two ways to become efficient. All right, higher efficiency is, and when we talk about economics, we have to understand there's no government regulation. We have to start here. There's no government regulation that you can wave a magic wand and all of a sudden there's more healthcare. That doesn't happen. It's impossible, right? Government can't just snap their fingers, say, now we're paying for it and there's going to be more of it. That does not function. That's not how economics works. So economics is a way of dividing up or allocating scarce resources. So if you look at economics from that perspective, then you start thinking, what we want is the most efficient possible system in place. That needs to be the goal, is how can we make this system as efficient as possible? So even if we went to a government-funded healthcare system here, unless, and I have heard nobody propose this, unless our thought process was we're going to have government take over all healthcare, where they're going to run the hospitals, the doctors are going to work for them, all these different things. That's how we're going to go to universal healthcare. And I haven't heard anybody propose that. You're still going to have a profit motive in the healthcare industry. These hospitals are still going to want to make a profit. You eliminate the profit of the health insurer, fine, but you'd replace that efficiency of the health insurer with the bureaucracy of government. Now, we can talk about how inefficient health insurers are, that's fine, but they're negotiating a mountain of healthcare regulations. So the problem with a government-funded system would be that it would eliminate the price initiative, the consumer's ability to look at something and make a decision based on price and properly value the thing that they're purchasing. Most people aren't going to care what healthcare costs if somebody else is paying for it. And I'm going to use an example that most people, I think, can grasp a little bit better than health insurance, because health insurance can kind of be this thing that we don't really think about. It comes out of our check, but we don't deal with it a ton. But most people have auto insurance, and it's an industry that I've been in for a long time. And your auto insurance has a fixed deductible. So, usually like $500. So you get in an accident, you go to the body shop, or you get in an accident, your insurance company sends an adjuster out to look at your car. They write an estimate. They say it's going to cost about $5,000 to get this thing fixed. You drive it over to the body shop. The body shop, let's say there's no new damage on this car. It's the same damage he's talking about that your insurance company talks about. So you get it over to the body shop, and the body shop says, no, to fix this damage is going to cost you $10,000. And I've had this conversation enough times in my career to know exactly how it's going to go. You're going to be insanely angry at your insurance company. They're the bad guys. You'll insist on the most expensive parts. You'll take it to the best body shop. You'll want everything done at top tier repairs, no matter what kind of condition, how old your car is. You're going to look at that and say, I want the absolute best, because you're not paying for it. You don't have a cost consideration. So you want the best. Now, what if your deductible is based on a percent of the repair cost? Let's say instead of a $500 flat deductible, you had a 10% deductible, or 20% of the repair cost was your share of the repair bill, right? Well, your attitude towards the insurance company is going to change pretty dramatically, pretty quickly. And what you're going to do is become very price conscious. And you would take a look at all these different estimates, and you'd take a look at the different body shops, and you'd make a decision on your own to determine, you know what? I'm going to go here because I want a proper repair of my car, but it's okay for them to use, let's say, an aftermarket part or a reconditioned part. And I know there's a difference in health insurance and the human body versus the car, but there's a consumer-driven motive to find the best value, the best return for his dollar in that scenario. We have completely eliminated the consumer from that equation. But if you look at the body shop analogy, you'd look at body shops then would say, okay, I know the consumer actually cares about what this costs. So I'm going to start looking for alternatives, alternative parts, alternative prices. I'm going to put pressure on my suppliers. I'm going to eliminate things that I don't necessarily need, maybe some creature comforts, whatever it takes to become as efficient as possible. Repair costs for your cars would go down because of the consumer's concern over that expense. Body shops would become more efficient. Because the cost of repairs came down, your car insurance premiums would fall. That is how a price-regulated market would function. Another thing is your insurance company, they'd start eliminating staff members. You wouldn't need as many estimators because they could trust that the consumer was actually acting with due diligence in terms of finding the best price. So maybe they don't have to look at every car. Estimators are one of the largest expensive insurance companies have. So all of a sudden, you got everybody being able to become much more efficient because the consumer has a genuine concern over what things cost, and it brings the price across that entire industry would come down. Like I said, that's how a price-regulated market would function. If you eliminate the consumer, and you, in particular, you put everything in the hands of government, but eliminating the consumer period means that the other way to become successful is lobbying. That's how you become profitable. Our current healthcare system separates the consumer from pricing, and delivering quality in the most efficient manner, that's not important. Using legislation and lobbying to gain advantage in the marketplace is the clearest route, right? That's what you're going to do. I don't care what my insurance, I don't even really care what my insurance costs because I'm not paying for all of it. My employer is paying for the majority of my health insurance. I'm only paying a small portion of that. I have my co-pays, but outside of that, I don't really care what the cost of like going in for a checkup, for example, because I don't pay for checkups. You know, it's mandated that most policies cover that stuff. So I don't care what that costs. And as such, I think that care providers charge more than they need to for those things. But that's only because we're separated from the cost. So you take big pharma, corporate healthcare, big insurance companies, and they're working together to create a system that benefits them, not the end user. So, and when you hear people who talk about the free market, they're going to say that we don't have a capitalist system. We have a crony capitalist system. And what is cronyism? Cronyism is the appointment of friends and associates to positions of power regardless of qualifications. And I think a lot of times when we think about cronyism, we think about the politicians. Politicians spend 70% of their time fundraising. Their most important concern, their number one priority is getting reelected. They are the cronies, not the businesses. The businesses are the appointing cronies into these positions. Your guy, the guy you're going to go vote for, he's taking money from big pharma. He's taking money from corporate medicine. He's taking money from the health insurance industry, and he's making decisions that benefit them. That's why the Affordable Care Act was such a mess. Are you kidding? We're going to legislate that every American is responsible to buy this product, and if they can't afford it, we'll just pin that on the taxpayer? That's a handout to big insurance. Whether you liked Obama or not, that was a terrible bill that never should have gotten passed because it was written by big insurance. It was written by big pharma. Big pharma doesn't want competition. They don't want the consumer paying for their own health care. If the consumer's paying for their own health care, they're really going to start, why am I paying this much money for an aspirin? Why am I paying this much money for this drug? Not only that, but they're going to insist on cheaper alternatives like cannabis-based painkillers instead of opioid-based painkillers. They're going to look for natural remedies. They're going to look for wellness and other options as opposed to this incredibly expensive healthcare system. So it's very beneficial to big pharma, corporate healthcare, and major insurance industries that consumers stay separated from pricing. That's key to them maintaining their incredible profitability. So money interest. They want massive government involvement in healthcare. That's what they want. They want the government heavily involved in regulating this industry to protect their profit. And so if you think about how our system works, how our employer-based system works, it gives insurance companies a captive audience. So think about your own employer. You have a few different plans to choose from, but how many different providers do you have to choose from? How many different insurance companies can you choose from at your place of employment? For the most part, you have a few different plans offered by one company. That's a captive audience. They love that. Are you kidding me? Can you imagine not being able to shop around for a product? I work for General Motors is a bad example. I work for General Electric. I wanted the name General in there. I work for General Electric, and as a result of working for General Electric, they pay a big portion of what it costs for me to buy a car because I need a car to get to work. But I'm only allowed to buy a Ford. And I'm only allowed to buy it from one dealership. What's the motivation for Ford to offer me a good deal on that car? I can't go look at a Chevy. I can't go look at any other product. I'm a captive audience because my employer provides my automobile. Now, I am only paying my automobile costs me the same no matter what. So I might as well take the most expensive one. And that's how we purchase healthcare. But that's a captive audience for the insurance companies. They love that. So the only really reason to put government in charge of healthcare is if you believe government would be more efficient at delivering healthcare to us than would be the private market. If we're talking about efficiently delivering healthcare, the only reason to use government healthcare, to implement government healthcare, would be if you felt government would do it more efficiently than the private sector. So here's an interesting article from Time. This is a very left-leaning article. They're talking about our system versus the Canadian system. And I personally think that debate's over when it comes to healthcare. And here at the headline, right? U.S. spends $2,500 per person on healthcare administrative costs. Canada spends $550. Now, Canada spends $550 in administrative costs per patient because they have a single payer system that is incredibly more simple than our system with all of its regulations, all the different providers. It's a lot simpler to just go and send the bill to the government. Government pays it and sends it back. And the Canadian system is better than ours. We keep having this argument about whether our system is better or the Canadian system is better. The Canadian system is better than ours, but a free market system would be superior to the Canadian system. That's the conversation we need to be having. The Canadian system has wait time issues. The Canadian system has issues of mortality. Statistically, we can argue back and forth about all these different outcomes, but from a statistical perspective, there is a conversation to be had about whether or not the United States actually, when you really dig into it, has better outcomes than the Canadian system does. But the bottom line is their system is far more efficient than ours in terms of administrative costs, and everybody's covered. So it's really hard to argue that even though they may not have quite the same level of outcome that we do, which is even that's arguable, that their system isn't better than ours. So I think it's a foolish argument to say, no, our system's fine, it's better. What we've got to understand is that the free market system would be even better because you still have a middleman. So you still have a lot of misallocation. So I was thinking about how we could deliver, what would be the methodology of delivering healthcare in the United States in a free market system. Now I think back to there's an association that tried to start this up a while back. Let's see here. It might be in this one. So there's an association that started a while back, and this is in the 1930s. What progressive doctors sought to organize themselves into the first healthcare cooperative or health maintenance organization so that they could provide care to working families under a group plan. Seeing a threat to its own power, the AMA, in a blatant antitrust violation, prohibited members from working for those early health maintenance organizations. So back in the 1930s, if you think about, when this whole thing started, we talked about how we distorted the healthcare system way back then. There was an organization that was trying to figure out a way as healthcare started to become something that people were taking advantage of. And you're starting to see people get treatment. You're starting to see tiny little advances in healthcare. How do we provide healthcare to people who need it? You started seeing some free market solution there, and that got stomped out right away by the American Medical Association. And they have you'd think they'd have a good history. They have a very poor history when it comes to looking at free market solutions or even universal healthcare. They kind of oppose any change to the current status quo. But what we have now is we have this middleman situation. And I look at that scenario of these doctors trying to come together, and I look at healthcare today, and we never got to see how healthcare would look in a free market economy, or if it ran in a free market system. And one of the ways, oh, there's my dog barking in the background. One of the ways that I think it would have functioned way better is that, here's just off the top of my head. You have a large hospital. I used to live up in Wisconsin, so you have this large West Wisconsin Health hospital. And what if they offered a subscription service, right? You're paying X amount of dollars every month directly to the care provider, and they will take care of your medical needs in this facility, right? And then, obviously they'd have to have partnerships so that you can get care nationwide, all these different things. But your primary care is going to you're going to get it when you're at home anyway, you're sick or whatever. So you're paying to subscribe to a particular health network like West Wisconsin Health or the Mayo Clinic or, all these different corporate health things that are all over the country. And I think we'd have more of them, and I think they'd be smaller, and they'd be competing for your dollar against another care provider. So their goal would be to create a great deal of value for you at the lowest possible cost. But their number one goal would be to keep you healthy. And we've heard a lot of talk about how our system doesn't keep you, it's sick care, not health care. Well, of course, selling drugs is very profitable. Selling expensive procedures is very profitable. We're not encouraged really to eat healthy or to exercise. I mean, I think your doctors will mention it to you from time, but you're just as likely to get a prescription to lower your cholesterol as you are to be told, hey, you need to get your weight down, you need to be exercising, and to really put you on a strict plan. And our society doesn't, you're not allowed to criticize people for being overweight and all that stuff. So that's part of it as well. But, we've got a cultural issue around that. But quite frankly, I want my healthcare provider to want me to be as healthy as possible. And if they have to cover me based on the premium that I'm paying, if they have to provide my health care, first, they're going to make my preventive care incredibly cheap, because they want to make sure that I'm coming in for my appointments and making sure that they're keeping an eye on me because an ounce of prevention, pound of cure, and all that stuff. They're going to want to make sure that I'm coming in, and my deductibles and my coverage is probably going to be tied to getting my regular checkups done. Some of them might be done, you look at auto insurance, go back to auto insurance all the time. They might say, look, you need to get, 10,000 steps a day, or, 50,000 steps a week, or some level of activity. If you can commit to this level of activity, we're going to give you this level of break. They would be encouraging you as much as possible to utilize as little healthcare as possible while you're still paying that premium. That's how they would get their path to profitability would be keeping you healthy. That's how a free market healthcare system would function. That's how we would all be better off in a free market system, because the primary goal would be, yes, to deliver high value healthcare to you in the most efficient manner possible. You would have a direct stake in shopping around, which would force competition between healthcare providers. You'd be cutting out this massive middleman and eliminating a ton of administrative costs. And your healthcare provider would have a vested financial interest in making sure that you are as healthy as possible. Right now, they don't have, look, it's incredibly profitable for them to sell drugs. It's incredibly profitable for pharma to sell you drugs. If everybody in the United States suddenly got within a healthy weight and was running a couple of miles a day, or lifting weights, or doing some kind of physical activity, and obesity disappeared in this country, there are pharmaceutical companies that would lose billions of dollars. Healthcare providers that would lose billions of dollars. That means the system's not set up right. The incentive should be to keep you healthy. A free market system would create that. The system that we're in does not. And again, like I said, you're separated from the costs. The insurance companies have a captive audience, so they get to be very profitable. The big pharma has insurance. They can charge whatever they want for their drugs. Corporate healthcare has, they have their insurance money coming in, so they're very profitable. A ton of money gets lost in administration, and that's what happens when you put somebody in between the consumer and the end user. or the consumer and the provider, I should say. The consumer is the end user. So, and that's why government-run healthcare eliminates that concern. It eliminates the pricing concern. It eliminates overutilization. It doesn't incentivize healthcare really to keep you healthy. I think you'd have a continuation of the system we have right now, where people didn't care about costs, providers didn't care about really keeping you healthy, because at the end of the day, we know when the budgets got overran and when this thing would start spiraling out of control because of overruns in costs, they would just come back to the taxpayer and say, pay more. So there's no incentive here to be efficient. There's no incentive here to keep you healthy. It's just an incentive to get you on the program. And if you're a person in power, that's great, because now you're dependent on this program and you're always going to vote to keep it and you're never going to vote away. So the people who support it will always be able to stay in power. That's the issue. That's the issue with healthcare. It's a conversation we don't want to have. We keep fighting about our system versus theirs. Canada's system's better than ours. It's not. Stop having that argument. Of course it's better than ours. It's not perfect. It's not a great I wouldn't even call it a great system. Ours is terrible. Theirs is pretty bad. And a free market system would be really, really good. And that's how we should be putting healthcare together. So that I don't know, reading chapter 6 of Saul, that's where it took me. It took me right to healthcare. And I just started thinking about how we deliver healthcare in this country and what the incentives and motives are behind the providers of this. And that's kind of what jumped out at me. So I don't know who's here. I don't know who stuck around. I am going to continue to work with this software. So for those of you who've been watching, who jumped on the other day and saw that I had issues and all that, I am using OBS software, OBS Studio. And for some reason, I'm having all kinds of issues jumping between these different screens. So I had a few different scenes set up, and for some reason, it just does not want to work. So I don't know. I'm gonna have to figure it out. I'll go back and watch the tutorial again. I appreciate those of you who did come back or stick around and watch this. Thank you very much. I will be back. I'm going to try and do a live every day. And I think my goal is going to be to try and get a pre-recorded one out 2 or 3 times a week. I think that's kind of going to be my new schedule. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm going to try and do something live like this every day, as opposed to what I was doing was posting pre-recorded stuff. But if I don't get better with OBS Studio, I won't be doing that. But keep an eye out for tomorrow. I will be back on here. We're going to be talking about maybe the DNC a little bit, probably just a news day tomorrow. We got second night of the Democratic National Convention, so that'll make for interesting chit chat. So that's what I'll be on here discussing for the most part tomorrow. Anyway, once again, I want to thank you all for sticking around, and we'll catch you next time. And now I'm going to try and figure out how to stop this live stream. So tried to figure out how to get it going. Now we're going to figure out how to end it. So there's a button. Let's see if that does it. Thanks, y'all. We'll see you next time.